move on to chapter 2, the power of insight. I was really struck with the distinction that Jamie makes between the difference of reading for information versus reading for insight. And I could relate to it in a number of ways, both from a reading perspective. I know I spent most of my time as a kid in school reading to just get the, check off that I'd read the required pages that the teacher had assigned. I wasn't reading for enjoyment. I wasn't reading for insight. I wasn't reading for understanding. I wasn't reading for any reason other than just to get through it. And for most of my life, I hated reading. I kind of had the insight that I've been doing it wrong all this time. So that was a bit of a wake-up call for me. And this reading thing, I also think of it as listening, as I've gotten more involved with coaching and listening to clients, and then seeing how that listening can translate over to my relationships, listening for information versus listening for understanding or for insight. And it's two big things that are quite different.
Yeah. The listening one is for me is so big. It's always intriguing to me. We had people in our house yesterday, and it's always intriguing to me when there's a group of people and there's a bit of an animated. It was a very political conversation going on yesterday, and people have opinions, and I was just sitting back observing it and waiting to see when someone jumped in before the other person stopped talking. It happens all the time. So because they're in their heads going, yeah, but I know this thing, or I think this thing, or so that from a listening point of view, not even to go near the coaching and at this point, because there's so much more about that, but just in general in everyday life, how people listen, or rather how they don't. I remember 20 plus years ago, early on in my coaching, listen to when they were talking about listening from our point of view or listening from their point of view. And most people haven't learned to listen from another person's point of view. They just, they wouldn't see that as a thing because they're in their own heads of, I have my thoughts and I have my opinions and I have my feelings about this, and I want to get that out there. And just even when you go back to kids again, if you watch how kids don't particularly listen because they're not there yet, but it's just intriguing that yes, there's such a vastness to listening, and we have such capacity for it, but maybe not taking full advantage.
Yeah, just as both of you are talking, first of all, I realized that until that insight was another word that it wasn't even in my mind. Like, it's just not there. One of the, I didn't have a concept of insight, or better, it was a concept of me not being an insightful person. So it was something that I pushed away. And in the same way that reading or listening or anything else, I'm thinking especially back to sort of kids who often hear, by the time they've got to the end of the school term and it's report time, and how often I would see on my school report, like implications that suggest Elaine just doesn't listen. And how that actually has shaped a large part of my life, especially for trying to read something or trying to listen to something. Because either way, somebody out there in chapter 1, in the circumstance, has told me that I can't do it. And I've believed them. And in particular, when I'm reading, let's say, or when I was reading, I would realize that I was trying to read something that, especially if it, okay, so I notice while I'm reading this book in particular, because Jamie, for me, uses a language that I'm just not used to, that's all. His whole lexis, the syntax, the everything. Whereas when Jamie speaks, and even if he's speaking the same words, I seem to understand it better. Oh. And I sort of have a little proof of that, because some of the text, I've read the text of his videos, his audio videos. I read the text and read along, and realize that I definitely have a preferential way of learning. So I'm wondering if from that, listening for insight, let's say, or reading for insight, could in some way also be, back to chapter 1, some kind of misunderstanding that blocks the process, if you like. Yeah, presuming that I have learned how to read and have learned, let's say, how to listen. And not only that, but presuming, okay, reading maybe not, could be not, but listening is actually that we're born with the ability to listen, unless unfortunately we have some sort of impediment or something. But generally speaking, most human beings have an innate capacity to listen. So again, if there's something in listening that actually has something to do with misunderstanding in the same way.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of on page 24 and 25, he talks about the magic eye images that you have to look at a certain way, and then the image will appear to you in the graphic. But it's kind of like that. Like if if you're grinding away trying to have an insight, it's the same as grinding away trying to see those hidden images. Like you can't. That's not how you do it. It's about softening your gaze or quieting your mind.
Yeah. And I've got a beautiful example of that. I can't do those magic eye things. And I've just realized why. I've only ever done it once, very recently, very, very recently. And I realized that every time it's been like up in your head, oh my God, everybody's doing this and I'm missing out here and I've got to be able to do this. So I'll put this image in front of me and I'll stare at it. And I'll be going, where's the image? Where's the image? Where is it? Where is it?
Where's the elephant?
Where is it? All right, no, you just got to soften your gaze. Okay, how do you soften your gaze, Elaine? Soften your gaze, Elaine. Soften your gaze. Like nothing happened. And I walked past, there was some here in Turin, street artist. He'd got some stuff up. He'd got up a series of stuff that he'd actually painted. Those magic eye drawings. And I just walked past it. But I've got shops on one side and then I've got the street on the other, and the sellers, the guys have lined up their wares and their things up on the street side. So I'm kind of looking there just to avoid the people basically, and I wasn't really interested in what all these little banks and stuff benches and stuff were selling. But I just turned my head one way and just caught. And what I caught was the image embedded before I'd even realized that I was looking at one of those magic eye paintings. And that's the only time I've ever been able to see one. Because I didn't even know I was looking at it. And that's
You
interesting.
had no contaminated thinking?
None whatsoever at all. Yeah, none whatsoever at all.
That's a brilliant example. That's
Yeah.
such a good example of no contamination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how much that perhaps contamination is definitely connected to expectations. Like I'd expected to be able to see this thing that I couldn't see when I put myself to the test.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you put yourself to the test, you're in your head looking for the test and wondering if you're going to pass it or all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So automatically there were no expectations because I wasn't even expecting to see the image. And lo and behold, there it came. I wasn't even expecting to see anything. I just wasn't expecting, full stop.
Yeah. Well, I love how that points to, there's a sentence I highlighted. It says, the reality is that every person has the source of insight and realization within them.
Yeah, I underlined that.
Like that's a great example of how like Elaine cannot see these magic eye posters except for when she can.
She can, yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example.
The capacity.
You have to remember that example, Lorraine. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Capacity was there. It's always there.
Yeah.
That is such, I will remember that example. That's a brilliant example.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fabulous, Greg. It's because everything hinges on except when she thinks she can, or when she can.
The other one that you said earlier that really struck me was, the belief that you couldn't listen properly because the teacher or whoever had told you that was the case.
Yeah, on numerous occasions, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, this is, I know for me, kind of like you, Elaine, kind of talking about not even knowing what an insight was or whatever. Like I've had kind of milestone moments in my life that I thought I had a clear idea of what had happened or how it had, what had occurred. And then when I discovered this idea of insight, I realized, oh, that's not actually what happened. It was, I had an insight. So I'll give you an example. So I grew up with an older brother who's almost 2 years older, but was only 1 year ahead of me in school because he's a January baby and I'm an October baby. So technically, in real terms, I was the youngest of the people in my grade. So developmentally, I was always behind, and he was the oldest in his grade and was always kind of developmentally ahead. Anyway, long story short, he's like a super genius, most amazing student, blah, blah, blah. And so every year I'd get to school and they'd say, oh, you're Chris Fisher's brother. And then I'd start doing tests and things. And they'd be like, are you sure you're Chris Fisher's brother? Because I couldn't compare with his level of academic performance. And when I was going into grade 7, we moved from Mississauga to Waterloo, which is about an hour west of where we are. And all of a sudden I was in a school setting where nobody knew who Chris Fisher was. Nobody knew who Greg Fisher was. And that whole comparison it didn't exist.
Wow.
And that was the year that, that was the start of me doing well academically in school. And I'd always known that that was a pivotal time in my life. But I had chalked it up to the circumstances. Oh, it's because I'm in a new town with new friends and new teachers and blah, blah, blah. But when I look back at it now with the language of knowing what an insight is, and I realized I had an insight that I was capable of doing better, that I all those years when I didn't do well, it's because I convinced myself that I wasn't capable, and I didn't really try because it was a futile. Why even bother trying? Like, I'm not going to be able to compare or compete. And then when I had that insight that it's not about competing, it's just about being true to myself, and boom, everything's kind of taken off from there. So yeah, the power of that insight was quite profound for me in my life.
Yeah.
And how often
it sounds like, it's so interesting. It sounds like you weren't even caught in your belief, you were caught in other people's. I mean, how incredible is that?
Yeah.
You were caught in their belief. Wow. What did I highlight? After the magic eye piece, I love this whole realization paragraph, the reading for realization, listening to music. When you're reading or listening for realization, you get a feel for what the person's saying, seeing beyond the written or spoken word, to what they're really trying to convey. And that goes back to kind of my point about conversation when you're, and I think if we talk about in our terms, when we're listening for connection as opposed to listening for content, you just hear so much more with people when you're really trying to get a handle as to what's going on, not just what someone is saying and what they're expressing. I think for me that whole realization and listening in a different way, that's what it kind of speaks to me, and making a space for insight to emerge, which is clearly what you were able to do when you got to a different environment. There was space for you to see something else that you hadn't seen.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's a third kind of category called listening to fix things, which is the mode I have often found myself in with my daughter in particular. So when she'll tell me about what's going on with her at school or with work or friends or whatever, I'm in fix it mode. Like, oh, she's coming to me with a problem. I need to solve it. And she said to me one day, she goes, Dad, I'm telling you all this not so you can fix it. I just need you to listen. And it was kind of a wake up call that, the support she needs from me as her father is just to listen to her and be there and support her and connect with her. I don't need to solve her problems for her. I underline the sentence here that the biggest value is going to come from the core of your being. Like the only thing that's going to make a difference for my daughter in those cases is something that she sees for herself. It's not going to be something that daddy tells her to do or to not to do. And I find that has been a huge paradigm shift for me in coaching is 100% knowing that the thing that's going to solve my client's problem is going to come from them and insight that they're going to have for themselves.
Yeah. And also just to add to that, Greg, the knowing that they have the resources within them to be able to do that. Because, just kind of thinking your daughter was so right, and how often have I heard my daughter not exactly quite so eloquently as your daughter seemed to have said it to me. Basically, she told the mother where to get off, kind of thing. And because it's so true. And as I look back, I guess every bleep moment that I've had, and I've sort of said, I need some help on this. The thing is that you actually really already know, more or less, maybe more, maybe less, what the solution is. You already know that. And when people come in and try to fix what it is that you already know, it's kind of like a sort of, it's like some sort of painful jar to your own sense of dignity in knowing and own inner knowledge. Like, we already know that. Now what are you going to try and fix that? Well, I already know that. But what you want is, like your daughter says, is just something else. It's a support. It just be there. It's like, my case, it was, Mum, just shut up and listen to me. Is what I'd get, and there's that second one when you can see the resources that people have within them any perhaps any inkling or tendency to want to fix it will be removed. I guess, providing in my case that my mind is clear and the connection's good, and that I can actually see that for myself for example, with my clients.
Mm.
You just made me think of something, and it's so many years ago, and I haven't thought of it for so long. When I first started my coaching training, I had a mentor coach, and I loved her dearly. I thought she was super skilled, and she was. But you just reminded me of something. It was very back in the day. It's when coaching was very practical, and she always used to give me homework, and I never did it. So you have to bleep that, Greg. I never did it because it didn't make sense to me.
Mm.
And I would feel all the resistance, but I was kind of afraid to say, I'm not doing that. It doesn't make sense to me. So I'd go off and do whatever I was doing. And then probably it was a bit like going to confession. I came back the next week and made it up. I've forgotten all about that. And I didn't even see, oh my God, this is actually crazy. I just realized now, it's like, wow, no wonder I was resistant to that. It just didn't make sense.
Mm. So
back to the listening and the connection, and her having the knowing that I knew what to do. That's amazing to me. Yeah, and it made me feel bad. It actually made me feel bad. I was thinking, well, these are probably the things I should be doing, because if she thinks I should be doing, I probably should be doing them. They don't make sense to me, so I'm not going to do them. It was a whole thing for a long time as it happened. But how interesting. That's a good lesson, isn't it?
Yeah.
Coaches. Yeah. Oh man, I hadn't seen that. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for that.
I don't even know what I said. Isn't that wonderful?
That's the way it usually works.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Isn't it though? Oh wow.
Should we jump into the thought experiment for this chapter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll read it out. It says, this is on page 30. Thought experiment. Insights and realizations are a natural part of being alive. Sometimes small, everyday insights end up being as profound as the big ahas. As you think about it now, what are some of your more useful and impactful insights and aha moments so far?
I had one at the weekend. Was it the weekend or Friday? I can't remember. And it really was a moment of, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And that was it. It was just, it was like it flashed up in really big letters. And I went, oh, cool. That's cool.
It's amazing. And did that feel like Jamie used this metaphor of icebergs calving when big chunks of ice fall off the side of an iceberg into the ocean. I'm just curious, when you had that insight, what was the feeling that came with that?
It was probably before I sent Elaine that message saying I feel guilty how happy I feel this weekend. Yeah, it's really like that. Yeah, it's like it's been a whole, like I've shed layers. Yeah, absolutely, like I've shed layers. And I'll take it even further. I'll take it even further in regards to this understanding, because I have been beating myself up a little bit that I'm not as far as I should be, could be, want to be, need to be. I've been doing all that. And then I just looked and it was something, I'm pretty sure it must have been after I heard something from Dr. Bill Pettit, I don't know. And I was just like, no, I'm just exactly where I'm supposed to be. And that's it. It's the only place I can be. So that's just it. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. Where else could you be?
I haven't had a sore tummy in days, interestingly. I have not had a sore tummy in days, which has been a bit of a problem lately. So and I just realized that. Yeah. Yeah, where else could I be?
Yeah.
Where else could I be? What about you guys? Small, big, any?
Yeah, small one that's just come to mind. I I find I have a problem actually. I know I've had many since I began this course, or at least I'm aware of many, on the understanding that I'm sure I've had many in my whole life, but just haven't seen it. So where I'm coming from. But one I've just had sort of like, I don't know, a few minutes ago, as I was listening to you guys, was the different take on these two words and the meaning and the hugeness behind it. And the words are, actually the three words, I don't know. And how wonderful it is to be able to say that, even when at the moment of saying it, you're in the position of supposed authority. And like all the contaminated thinking would point me to, you should know. Why don't you know? Which would lead to wanting to fix something. But the insight I've had is just realizing that I'm beginning to say, I don't know, more and more. So like I'm doing the same things, it's all exactly the same, and then my answer is always the same, I don't know. But whereas prior to that would be like a full awareness of I actually don't know, which would create a hell of a lot of havoc in my behavior and in my head and all the rest of it. And being able to like consciously say, I don't know. And that's actually quite huge. And it's a very humbling experience. Just even to be able to share it. You know what? I just don't know.
Yeah, it's funny. The same three words wrapped in love and possibility and excitement versus doubt and inferiority and shoulds.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That is great.
Yeah. One insight that's coming to mind for me was I was on a course that weekend with Jamie, and on the Saturday, my wife was taking my daughter to get a nose piercing, which I was like adamantly against, even though I have tattoos and stuff. But it was just like, I had all this thinking around, well, what does it say?
Not my baby.
Yeah, what does it say about her? What does it say about, what are people going to think? What's it going to say about me? I don't know, all these kinds of things. Anyway, over the course of the morning session, I had a realization that it's like, I'm making all this stuff up. Like it's, whatever. So anyway, when they came back home, we were on a break and my wife and daughter came in the door and I ran over and I said, oh my God, I had a huge insight this morning. I said, Veronica, no matter what you do or whatever, you have my unconditional love. I love you no matter what. And her response was, you're so weird. So for me, it was a big moment. For her, not so much. But anyway, it was good.
Oh, that's brilliant. What did they say from the mouth of babes? Oh, wow.
So
that's funny. You're so weird. Oh, man. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
To go back to your I don't know thing, Elaine. Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly on the end, Greg, very quickly. And so, Greg, the next stage is to actually realize that you're so weird is a compliment.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And it's wrapped in love, just like my I don't know is.
Yeah.
It's in love and understanding.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That is brilliant. I love that. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, I was thinking about your I don't know thing, and I think where I don't know is really useful. We might have talked about this last week, Elaine. It's where we are making assumptions about what other people think because it's making us feel something. Yeah. And if we really truly acknowledge that we do not know what the other person is thinking, it releases so much. it just releases so much, because unless we actually ask them and they are 110% honest with us, which people can't always be because they don't, maybe don't know it all themselves, for us to really think, I don't know. And that I'm speaking from experience over the past week or so, what it also does is releases us from our story, because we've now made a story around it. Oh, so-and-so is thinking this, and that's why they behave like that, and that's why I feel like this, and so it goes on. So if we can actually draw back and go, actually, I really don't know. It looked like this, or this happened, but I don't know actually what was going on. Don't know what they were thinking. Don't know why they did that. That's it. It just releases so much. It's huge to be able to say that to ourselves.
And it saves a hell of a lot of time as well.
Yeah.
Like let's get on with, into some curiosity and into something, instead of hanging around in the I don't know space.
Yeah.
But it occurs to me too that even if we did know, or even if the person told us, they're just telling us a made up story too.
Exactly.
That's my point. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Where are we at?
I think we're at the end of the chapter. So I guess, is there anything else that we want to say about insight? The only other thing, I don't know if it was in this chapter or not, but that comes to mind for me is that I found very helpful for myself is knowing where my insight friendly spaces are. So when I find myself feeling stuck, or I don't know, in a low mood, I go for a walk, or I go for a nap, or I go have a shower. Like those are my three kind of go-to. And sometimes I have to do all three in sequence before I snap out of it. But I often find if I'm on my computer all day and I'm trying to solve a problem or build something, I can't figure out how to do it. I'll just go lie down for 10, 15 minutes. I mean, I may not even fall asleep, but I just let my mind settle, and almost guaranteed that by the end, a new, fresh idea will pop into my head for how I can approach it, and back to work I get.
Yeah. The only thing I can sort of think to say about insight is, maybe to anybody who's maybe new to this, or hasn't even got a clue, fine. But like, I sort of feel like saying, God, guys, if I can do it, you can do it. You can all do it, and it's there. And because literally, I mean, I have tons of insights today. I honestly do. They may be silly or just silly never, but just small. They're not sort of mind blowing but always pertinent to something. And from me moving from a place of what I kind of now consider my past life, like sort of I was just completely oblivious. And so like if somebody like me with such a low sort of consideration of themselves can actually get to, I mean, literally, 5, 6, 7, 8 insights, some big, some small, some important, some just curious, some whatever, on a daily basis, that sort of there is hope. There's hope for all of us. That can be as any sort of final consideration on chapter 2 and insight.
I think for me there, Elaine, it's that it was happening your whole life. You just didn't notice.
Absolutely.
It just happened. There'll be a million times where you've had an insight, changed direction, made a different decision, didn't do something. It's been happening all the time. It just wasn't on your radar.
And it's I guess this is going to come up again in chapter 3, how perception is created, if you like, or it's something to do with the consciousness, which I guess we'll be getting into later on, but that's the next bit. So
Right. Well, this has been very insightful, so thank you both.
been
into it.
very insightful, most enjoyable. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.